Hi everyone, my name is Ms Osmus. I'm an English teacher. I've been teaching for the last 10 years and I've taught grades 6 through 12. So today I'm going to share with you some of my knowledge on graphic novels and we're going to go over the stylistic and structural elements that make up a graphic novel. First of all, if you are wondering to yourself, what is a graphic novel? It's basically like a comic book, except it's kind of in the form of an actual novel. So it's a long version of a comic book that actually looks like a typical chapter book. So we are going to start by going over the different elements that you will probably run into when you are starting to read your graphic novel. So first of all, this first image that we see here, it's an example of a frame. I'm writing in highlighter right now, but this is a frame. So basically it's like a page from the comic book or the graphic novel that you will be reading. So then within this frame, you have the different boxes, which we call panels. So you have that here. And then you also have like the little images that fall within each of the boxes. So I'm kind of going to walk through some of these key terms and I will point out where we see them in this example frame on this first page. And just so you know, this frame is from a graphic novel called Persepolis, and it's about the Iranian Revolution. So just a little background. Okay, so the first term that you need to know, and the ones that are highlighted in yellow, these are probably the most important and the most common. Okay, so a panel is a framed image. So any of these right here, these are all examples of panels. Okay, each of these little boxes. You also can have one that's a borderless. So if you go up to the top here, you'll see there's this like newspaper front page that is part of the graphic novel, the frame of the page, but it doesn't have a border around it. And sometimes the authors of these graphic novels do that for a reason, maybe to make it stand out more. So there's different reasons why they might have that borderless panel. The other things that you need to think about, it's not as important, but a splash is basically when the images that are on the page like spill off to it. So it says the kind of panel that spans the width of the page. So it could take up the whole page, though you don't really see any like margins or borders or any boxes specifically. Another thing you should be aware of is voiceover. So that's when the narrators speak directly to the reader. So if you look at the top up here, we have the voiceover. It's kind of letting the reader know exactly what the speaker of the story is trying to share. And then the voiceovers usually appear at like the top or the bottom of the panel, not usually in the middle. And you should also note that it's different than a speech bubble. So the voiceover, you can see that it kind of stands alone here, whereas speech bubbles, you can actually tell they go with a specific character, and it kind of represents the dialogue between each of the characters in the individual panels. Then we have something called an Emanata, which is a fun word, but it's things like the teardrops, sweat drops, question marks, motion lines, hearts, anything that an artist draws like besides the character's face to portray emotion. So if we go back to the top here, if you look at the female protagonist here, you could see the little tears coming off of her eyes. So that's an example of an Emanata. And obviously it is to show her sadness. It's kind of hard to write that she's sad, so it's easier to show visually. And that's really the cool thing about graphic novels, is that instead of just either reading the words on the page or the author writing the words on the page, you actually get to see like what it looks like visually to give you a different kind of understanding. Also, kind of going along with Emanata, we have expressions. So that's how the author draws the characters' faces or body language to portray certain emotions. So if you want to look at expressions, This is a good example of an expression right here. You can tell that she is very angry. Gutter is something that's important. We see an example of a gutter up here, and that's the space between the panels. So the important part about the gutter, you can see like in this definition, it says the readers tend to fill in the blanks and imagine what happens between panels. So that space, the gutter between the panels, that allows the reader to become more engaged with that text and kind of infer what they think might be happening in between. Our next term over here is narration. So comic books and graphic novels allow the writer to show and tell at the same time. So you just need to know that there's a combination of narration in both like what you see and what is actually written. So you just need to remember as you're reading a graphic novel, you need to pay attention to the things that you see and the things that you read. The next few all have to do with like the way that the panel looks and how kind of the author designed that particular panel. So it has to do with the color, it has to do with where things are placed in the panel itself. So color obviously are the colors that the author uses that will affect the reader's experience. So a lot of times graphic novels could be in black and white, but sometimes there might be color, and you'll see that in a few examples at the bottom of this page. Then we have our term graphic weight, and this is used to discuss the amount of contrast in an image. So graphic weight has to do with like how the colors black and white are used, if there's different shades of gray between them, or how vivid the colors are, so that you might see in a different way depending on whether your graphic novel is black or white or if it is illustrated in color. So as you're paying attention to the color and the graphic weight that the author uses in the graphic novel, you also need to consider things like foreground, midground, and background. So that has to do with where the subject is placed in the panel in relation to like other objects within that particular panel. So in the foreground, the subject is like the closest to the reader, so that would draw attention to the character that's within that specific panel. So you would see them in the foreground if the main character like takes up most of the space in the panel. Midground means that subject stands like in the middle of the scene. So you would see them with maybe other characters or a different sort of setting happening, but that helps to give like a bigger picture, so it could create more like, it could show more tension within that particular panel or tension within the story. And then the background is obviously objects are in the background, so that's like things that tell us what the setting is. The smaller things that you might notice behind the character. But all of these are important in like telling the story and helping us to be able to understand exactly what's going on and the context. And then finally, the last graphic novel term that we're going to go over is just the term transition. So there are 6 different types of transitions. You don't necessarily need to remember all of the names, but it's important to know that they exist just so you can kind of see how the transitions happen between the different panels in the story. Okay, so some of them are more self-explanatory than others, but we'll go through them really quick. So moment to moment, basically it's just like, it's almost like seconds between each of the panels. So moment by moment you can see the changes. So with this female character, you can kind of see the changes in her like facial expressions. Another one that we have is action to action. So you can see the start of this baseball player, the pitch is coming to him, and then the next action is him hitting the ball. We have subject to subject. So this one's kind of interesting because you see the people right here in this panel, but then you have like this word in the sky. So clearly it seems that the word in the sky is coming from the person in this panel, but the subject to subject kind of allows you to fill in the blanks between. So as a reader, you would try to figure out like, okay, what happened between where I see this character now to why I see these words. The next one is scene to scene. So that has to do with like the time period. So you can tell from this one here, it says 10 years later, that this first scene was before, and now you have you're like 10 years into the future. Aspect to aspect is interesting, and I had to remind myself what this one is, but it's basically looking at the same scene but from like a different perspective. So we see a Christmas tree in a house, then we also see Santa, so you can presume that they're in the same location, but you just see a different perspective of what's happening in that picture. Finally, the last one is non sequitur. So those are just things that do not connect in a logical way at all. So you can tell that both of these images, you're asking the question like, what do they have to do with each other? And that's something that the author uses in order to get you to kind of think and try to put pieces together. Okay, so now that we've gone through all of this, don't be afraid to go back up. You have the picture, the frame for reference on this first page, and then you also have all the definitions. So you have a lot of things that you can use as resources. The most important thing about reading this graphic novel, and probably the coolest thing about reading graphic novels, is it's not just reading, it's also like looking and seeing how the author uses color and images and the placement of characters in order to create and convey meaning. So it's a really cool opportunity to be able to not just read words in a book, but to also see the pictures that go with it.